on two main themes. One is computational journalism, so using computers to help for journalistic needs and study news online. And the second is trying to find creative approaches that are more appropriate for bringing people together in a community around data. And that's what I'll mostly be talking about here. But first, I wanted to do a plug for an event we're having at Northeastern in the fall. If you work in journalism, for all the people that raised your hand, and do data work, consider attending the Computation Plus Journalism Symposium. It runs every year. We're hosting in Boston. I promise I can tell you where the food is really good in town. This QR code takes you to a website that includes a link to the CFP. If you want to propose a session or a panel, they usually have a mix of journalists and academics and things like that. So it's a good mix of people, and we'd love to have you there. So that's my plug before I continue. And these slides are posted on the Zenodo, so you can get access there. Okay, so for what I want to talk about, I want to start by talking about why I think creative data representation is important. The first thing is that we started sort of what we think about as working with data now really came to maturity in fields like the sciences and statistics and economics and computation. So most of the tools or processes we use now matured in that field. And that's fine, that's great. The thing is now we're using them in other fields, a lot of them that you work in, right? Newspapers, museums, libraries, nonprofits, activists. So we've seen data move to new places. People call this datafication or other words, but we've all experienced this. You've all been in the middle of it, right? I think there's a problem there because the ways of thinking in these domains are often different than the ways of thinking in these domains. And because I'm a professor, I use long words to describe things, and one of the ones I use is epistemological resistance. So that way of thinking from the first domains, where the primary goals are things like evidence or a truth, if you want to go further, to new sectors where maybe the goals are things like empowerment or participation. Those are very different lists. So I want to talk about some inspirational examples that help me think about a redone toolbox for how we present data and bring people together around it. So I'll give a little more background, and then I'll give you 3 real examples that inspire me, and then show you 3 examples of my own work. So those initial cultures, I think they have some of these words that go with them. So things like formalism, certainly right now, cultures of surveillance with data, that has driven a lot of development and innovation. Capitalism has driven a lot of that, certainly in the US, in the context I work in. And authority, right? Very hierarchical forms of knowledge or information. Those are ways of thinking and ways of acting with data. And the modern tech tools we use, they embed these. Right? They embed these ways of thinking in the ways they're built and the ways they work. So when we pull something off the shelf, we have to think about what are those embedded points of view in that embedded approach. But in these new areas where data is being used, things like participation, community, impact, justice, these are some of the main cultures, right? It's a very different list. So we have this toolbox of working with data, which includes spreadsheets, bar charts, all the forms that we're used to, and the mechanisms, 2D encodings to change value attributes and things like that. And my argument is that that's great, and we need to blow up the toolbox to be more effective and bring people together around data in more appropriate ways in settings that look more like this, that have different goals than, say, trying to build a model to predict something. Because there's a lot of settings that use data that's not the goal anymore. Civic meetings, data journalists, meeting people where they are on a story, science museums, these are all settings I work in. So what does that look like? I want to be a bit more concrete, because that was a bit theoretical. So 3 examples that inspire me from other work. The first is called the Back 9. So this was created by a group called the LAPD, which is the Los Angeles Poverty Department. So it's kind of a joke about the Los Angeles Police Department, same acronym. They've been around for decades in an area of Los Angeles called Skid Row, which has a long history of being sort of marginalized by the city, a lot of homeless population. They've organized, they fought for their housing rights. There was they were attempts to legislate and try to take away their ability to stay in their neighborhood, right? To basically gentrify their neighborhood. They've organized, they've fought back, and one of the ways they did it really struck me. They made a data-driven mini golf course. So I don't know if any of you have played putt-putt, but it's kind of like a miniature golf course with lots of fun, interactive things like a windmill that spins, and you have to take a little putter and hit it underneath when it's spinning. It's like a pastime in the US that's super fun. It's a game. So they made this course that was a playable data course based on housing data. And they just presented it in their space in Skid Row, which is kind of like a museum space. So you can see some obvious things, like this was a line chart on the wall, right? It looks like a chart, but you played it by walking up the stairs, which was years, right? So time axis. Oh no, it wasn't years, sorry, it was number of houses. And then you rolled the ball down the tubes, and this was the amount of population, and this was the amount of available housing. So you literally saw and had to, with your body, feel the data. This is the whole course laid out. They did some wonderful performances that I won't sort of speak to, but they sort of had some theatrical performances. Each hole you could just play, or you could look at it and read one more layer of information to find out about the housing data, right? So it was a playable data course. And I like this one because it looks at sort of the shape and experience of data. 2, I love playing mini golf. It's just really fun. So it changes, your opinion, your point of view when you come into a space that's meant to be playful and fun about something serious. I'm going to go fast. Second example, Chicago police budget. So this is in the US, there was a wave of protests that you might have heard under the name of defund the police. The idea that our civic funding could be better spent on things that weren't policing to increase safety. A lot of that protest was driven by black activists in the summer of, I think it was 2020, I'm all confused now, 2020, yes. So this is, hopefully you can see this, but basically this is a sidewalk, and there is a bar chart constructed out of cardboard boxes that are painted green. And what it was is the bar chart showing the amount of funding in the proposed budget for the city of Chicago that here was allocated for policing, right? So that bar that goes all the way up, dudes on a ladder climbing up to put boxes up, that's the amount of funding for the police. Then there's schooling and social services, and then like public health is down here, right? So why is this interesting? One, it uses the power of spectacle, right? So you see it and you're like, oh, I want to find out what that is. 2, unlike a regular bar chart, it's changeable, right? You can grab a box and you can move it. So it suggests that your advocacy could work. To me, this is about the media they chose. The boxes suggest that the thing can be changed. So it creates a sense of possibility, and in this case, I hope that their goals could be met. Right? And the change of media does that, even though it's a very familiar bar chart form. In the US, most kids get introduced to bar charts, and I think my son saw it in 2nd or 3rd grade. So it's a very familiar form of in public schooling. Okay, I'm going to keep going. The third one is from Mexico City. Many of you might know this protest. Just as so you know, this is also about the disappeared. This is called De Nombre en Silencio. It's a project that was a documentary and then spun out into this collective effort to collect data from people who were looking for missing loved ones. And they collected it in a WhatsApp group, and what they collected was a photo and something that the ones that were left behind wanted to say to them, a message to send them. And Marta and her team turned this into a public spectacle in a number of squares on International Day of the Woman. And what they did was they made these little glass spheres with the photo and the message in it. And then they had the mothers, in this case, collect soil from the place where the person was from, put it in a bowl, and then they marched carrying those bowls across the squares. It's super moving. It speaks with a metaphor of motherhood and of growing the baby. It was a spectacle in public squares using this data they had collected about not only the disappeared, but also the messages that were for them. So it was this public spectacle that spoke to people in a very different way. So these are 3 examples that inspire me. Underneath the hood, I use the term epistemology because it's about the way of knowing something. So this is a great quote from two folks that inspire me, that we need to respect multiple ways of knowing things, not just the abstract formal one that is in our traditional toolbox, but a way of knowing data that might be, cardboard, or a mini golf course, or a bunch of people walking down the street. Those are all ways of knowing data in different ways. So another framework for thinking about it that helps me are these 4 terms as different ways of knowing. Experiential knowing, so of being somewhere and experiencing with your senses. Propositional knowing, presenting things that are more or less scientific, so abstracted. Propositional. Presentational, so this is like creating theatrical productions or artistic productions. And then practical, so the act of doing something, like maybe sports, and then remembering or knowing something based on the doing of it. That helps me. I borrow these from participatory action research from that field. The earlier models I borrow from anti-colonial work. Epistemological resistance is a term often used in anti-colonial work. So what does that look like for me? It looks like 3 approaches I've been working on for a varied portion of times. We've been doing community participatory data murals just for about 15 years. And we have a process for starting with some key stakeholders, developing data sheets, brainstorming a story with people, coming up with visual designs, and then painting a community mural. And then having a public event to open it. Data sculptures. This is a piece my wife and I created that is a giant table made out of welded together cutlery that I can tell you more about another time. But it travels around to places and evokes different questions, and it's actually about food security data. And then data theater, building on practices of participatory theater for empowerment that come mostly from Brazil and Latin America to try to say, what if we create theatrical productions and then have a facilitated conversation afterwards. And the theatrical production is inspired by and driven by data, and devised is the term that the theater folks use, is devised based on data. So all of that is coming out. This is another plug in a book that I'm writing, because I am an academic, in the fall, that'll be called Community Data. So if you're curious about that, you can follow me, and I'll keep you up to date. And then you can find me online at my email or on Mastodon or Twitter and Instagram. That's my website. And then this presentation is here. This will take you to the Zenodo where you can download a copy of that presentation. And that's 15 minutes, so I'm going to pause and leave the extra time that I got for questions. Thank you so much. Questions or comments?
Thank you for the very inspiring presentation. Can you elaborate more on the data sculpture thing? Because you said it's a spreadsheet and then you turn that into a story and then to the mural?
Which one, the sculpture or the murals? Which thing? The murals, yeah. So the process we've come up with the question is, how do we start with information and turn it into a mural? So the process we come up with is basically 4 or 5 stages. And we wrote a paper that has a good diagram describing it, and we have a 1-page handout. If you go to datamurals.org, there's a 1-page handout about our process too. It starts with key stakeholders that invite us in to work on a project together. We devise usually a 2 to 3-page handout, data handout, based on the literacy levels of the audience. So, this one particularly is from a group of, it was parents, staff, educators, and government people. So we went for, in the US, we used some bar charts and we used some tables and quotes. That was a 3-page handout. From there, we facilitate a bunch of processes that lead us to a story with a template. The template says, the data say blank. We want to tell this story because blank. And eventually that gets filled out through a lot of facilitation. And then from that story, we do collaborative drawing exercises that we've taken from mural arts practices, right? There's a long tradition of participatory mural making. So we borrow those techniques in addition to doing things like word webs of brainstorming terms and then doing drawings on sticky notes to get a visual symbolic language. And then, usually in this case, it's another collaboration with my wife. She turns that into a cohesive design. And then, or another artist does, and then we paint it in the usual collaborative mural way. We get a bunch of people together, we get some food, and we paint it on the wall. We've done small ones like this, which is just in an entry. We've done ones that are 30 meters across and 5 meters high. And this has gotten really some great traction in Kenya and that part of Africa. There's a lot of people doing data murals now, which is really cool. And there was something else I wanted to say about that, but I forgot what it was. Oh, a lot of those activities we use are on the databasic.io website, which is a website that I've created with Catherine D'Ignazio, where we have a lot of hands-on activities that have the same philosophy. Oh, here and there.
Hi, this kind of like communication really reminded me of Mona Chalabi's work, and I find it great. And I wanted to understand, like, if you have any ideas how more traditional media outlets and newspapers could be inspired by this kind of activities. How could we adapt that?
I completely agree. Mona Chalabi's work is inspirational. I think the pushing she's done is great. And even Nigel Holmes before her, a little more formal, but still invoking playful attitudes and approaches. So the question is, how can traditional media outlets that use data use these types of approaches? So first, that's in chapter 4 of the book to be come out. Second, I think there are evocative examples. So there are participatory examples, like you draw the bar chart and then it shows you the real chart and what everyone else guessed. So that's one form, I think, that focuses on participation. The creative media, I think there's lovely examples like the knitted piece from New York Times that was, she crocheted data charts about crocheting and how people like started in January and then drop off, if I remember right. There's virtual examples like the one's coming to mind right now in New York Times. I'm sorry for being so focused on that. But there was a piece they did about election funding where it started with an image of the White House and a virtual data sculpture in front of it made up of Monopoly houses. So Monopoly, the board game, everyone in the US plays it. And it had lots of houses. And then at the tippy top, it zoomed in to hotels, which were like the rich people that were funding. And then they used that visual imagery throughout. But it started with something a little more playful. So I think even on screen, you can say, what are the underlying points here? Creative representation and participation as two of them. Third, I think, like, I'm trying to work with news organizations to do public events that come with their story, The story came out this day. We did a public event in the Zocalo that afternoon, That does some of this stuff. If you know the domestic data streamers in Barcelona, they do amazing stuff like that. So if anyone wants to try stuff like that, come ask me.
I love how this turns data into emotion and that you really can feel it. Could you share some of the responses you've seen to one of the pieces, and has there been anything that surprised you?
Yeah, for sure. These are all great questions. So some responses, some of these projects, as I think Mago was talking about, the point is the process as much as the product, right? So in many of the mural projects, the point is that we're doing this to build a network of people that are working together on a data set. And yes, a mural comes out of it, but that network stays. So sometimes that's surprising to me as someone that was taught in a very Western, like, you get it done and the product is the point. Like, unlearning some of that has been really good to then sort of relearn, okay, this is the point of this activity. The network, the process is the point, and the humans in the room. Other ones, reactions. This was great. This is a table of 1,659 pieces of cutlery that my wife welded together and we co-designed. And when we show this piece, it's a big, giant table. We have 150 pounds. We drag it out. One time a guy came up and he helped us move it. And he was like, what is this? Because it's a giant table made of spoons. So it's a reasonable question to say, what is this? And we were showing it at a farmer's market, which so is like a public market where people that happened once a week. And we said, well, it's this cool table, and we made it. And it's about people that don't have enough food. So that number, 1,659, is the number of households that were applying for government benefits to help with food. It's called SNAP in the US. Every week during the peak of the pandemic in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, 1,700 households were saying we need help every week on top of the ones before it. So it's a crazy number. So we said, well, like, it's about that. And he was like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. We were like, great, go over there and sign up, right? You're eligible. So sometimes it is really direct, like there's a direct impact, not the conceptual one.
Speaking about the emotion, I was wondering if you are using augmented reality. Augmented reality.
So I think there's interesting work to be done in AR and data viz, mostly because the installed base is huge, right? Like there's a significant amount of people that have AR in their pocket. I think VR is a little different. But the short answer is no. I did some work 3 years ago trying to look at the examples we have. I just didn't find them compelling. Half of them are like, see the water level in 50 years. Like literally half of them, I'm not exaggerating, are things that simulate water being higher. It's like, is this the best we can do, really? And then there was one example, I think it was, I forget, maybe it was the post where it like rained on you. I was like, okay, either water's coming from below or above. Can we do something other than water with AR, please? So I think there's opportunity there. I have not explored it. Honestly, the reason is because like I'm a technologist. I was trained as an electrical engineer. I program a lot, but this stuff's more fun for me. You know, like I get people in a room and like we get to do stuff together. Fun is a real element of my choices about what projects I pursue, as much as impact is. So I just find this more fun. And I do think we need more AR examples. So maybe next year at csvconf we'll see some.
Yeah, so, okay, we are almost out of time.
Yeah, this is very inspiring. I wonder if you have had any example where the community appropriates of the process and they build from what you are doing.
That's a great question. So the question is, like, how has the community taken those methods and made them their own? We have, in a paper we wrote about one of these murals, we went back, it was actually in Brazil. We went back to Brazil. It was in Belo Horizonte. And the school we worked with, the youth there, were starting to make data-driven arguments in other places, which of course is great for me as a researcher. I'm like, oh, a year later they're doing stuff, amazing, I get a paper out of this. But like also like great because they were using information to make arguments. I think the murals, again, is the oldest work. So I think Kenya is a great example where it's been appropriated and used in tons of different ways. And I have a bunch of those examples in the book I'm writing, in chapter 6. But it's been great because they're using them a lot for public health messaging. And I find that really inspirational. There's other great examples from that area as well. There's a lot of innovation with data happening in that area. I don't know if that gets to what you wanted, but. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate the questions.
Yes, thank you.